Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about a new GASB exposure draft. This type of exposure draft typically comes out about once a year. This is our omnibus, and typically once a year GASB takes a look at some changes that need to be made to the codification that alone aren't big enough to qualify to be a separate standard. And so they basically collect them until they have enough, and then they issue an omnibus. So this year they issued that omnibus on July 1st. Comments are due September 17th. And again, these are primarily implementation issues. Some of them are related to things like leases and SBITA and PPP, which are coming down the pike, so they're starting to get questions about, as well as application of certain existing GASB standards. So the first two are what we consider to be targeted financial reporting. And when we look at the guidance that's out there, really at the time of deliberation, which was the intent of the standard, they had a project on non-exchange transactions, or that were guarantees, financial guarantees. However, now they're addressing the accounting for governments that extend exchange or exchange-like financial guarantees, so not originally in the scope of the non-exchange. And they're looking to see at what point a liability should be recognized in relation to these exchange and exchange-like transactions, and whether it should be the same as the ones that are used for those non-exchange financial guarantees. The second one is related to derivative instruments. If you look at Statement 53, it requires that a derivative instrument within scope is either an investment derivative instrument or a hedging derivative instrument. But stakeholders have provided feedback that's not necessarily the case. There are examples where you're in the scope, but they don't qualify for either. So again, they're going to identify the scope as well as the accounting there. Leases and SBITA. So again, when they're making changes to lease standard, because so much of SBITA carries forward from the lease standard, they have to make these changes at the same time. And this one's related to the short-term exception. And so when we look at the short-term exception here, they were concerned about modification. So basically, when you look at the standard, you have to look at a maximum possible term. And so say the maximum possible term was initially 6 months. But then you make a modification and now it's 18 months. Well, if you look at just what's remaining, it's 12 months. So you're back to being within the scope, and people have said that might be misleading. So the response that they provided here is that you should look at the entire lease term, the initial plus the extension after the modification, to determine if you still qualify for that short-term lease exception, really discouraging people from structuring their leases and then modifying them. They also clarified that contract provisions that allow for termination of a lease due to a violation of the contract terms should not be considered an option to terminate, because obviously that's contingent on the action or inaction of one of the parties. This one is a three-for-all. It covers PPP, leases, and SBITA. So again, subscription-based IT arrangement, public-private partnerships, and leases have a lot of the same guidance. In fact, some of the verbiage is basically repeated over and over again. And so when that happens and they decide to make a change, not only do they have to make a change in leases, which is where they started this, they recognize that they also had to update the guidance in PPP and SBITA. And this one is related to purchase options. So the purchase of an underlying asset is not considered an option to terminate if you actually look at the list in paragraph 12 of GASB 87. So in certain circumstances, when they're looking at the purchase option, it can actually result in a liability for a time period to which you obviously expected to have exercised that option. And so, these are where we look at these, pieces. And so they basically came back with guidance that says the presence of a purchase option may result in lease payments that include the present value that would otherwise be made subsequent to the expected exercise, as if the option were not exercised. And so now the option to purchase the underlying asset should be considered an option to terminate that should be taken into consideration when you evaluate the term. Now, I will tell you, most people would think this was intuitive, but it wasn't explicitly stated in the guidance and sort of seemed to be almost not permitted. So this is just a nice clarification. Again, it updates in all three, 87, 94, 96. This one impacts 94 and 96, and this is again related to verbiage. And so it actually technically also, I would say, applies to leases. So small, probably should update that title. And so this is looking at the receivable or the liability here. And the verbiage that's used in the standard says that you are not required to remeasure solely for a change in an index or rate. And it almost seems like you had the option to, which could lead to diversity in practice or inconsistent application. And so they came back and updated the verbiage to say that the receivable or liability should not be remeasured solely for a change in an index or rate to determine variable payments. So again, this is more of a just being clearer, not necessarily a change in the underlying standard. And then for PPP, public-private partnerships or public-public partnerships, a receivable for the underlying asset should be remeasured if there's a change in the PPP term and the change is expected to significantly affect the amount of the operator's estimated carrying value of the underlying asset as of the expected date of transfer. So this is a little bit unique to PPP, where we can have these underlying assets be receivables to which we have to have a valuation. So they're basically just giving us an update here on that remeasurement. And the deferred outflows of resources should also be adjusted by the same amount of any change resulting from remeasurement of the liability. However, if it goes below zero, you would obviously stop when it gets to zero, and then it would be anything would else flow through the resource flows statement or the quote unquote income statement. This is something that I expect to see from FASB soon. Reference rate reform is not going according to plan. We can thank COVID for this. The plan was for LIBOR to disappear after 2021. However, due to COVID and a variety of other things going on in the environment, they have indicated that it's going to probably extend potentially to 2023. And currently, the guidance in the standard basically says that you have to stop using LIBOR as of a certain time for a reference rate. And so it would be unfair if it was still being used to have that requirement. So basically, they indicate in a little bit of an update here, and they basically say LIBOR is no longer an appropriate benchmark rate once they stop making it. So when LIBOR ceases to be determined by the benchmark administration. So whenever it does die out, it no longer is an acceptable benchmark. And so instead of having a finite date in GAAP that is subject to change, they're just going to leave it to the standard setters or the administrators of LIBOR. This is another one. We used to refer to this as food stamps. We don't do that anymore. We call it SNAP. And SNAP used to be, or food stamps used to be literally pieces of paper. And so the guidance related to it was really in line with this concept of that you had coupons basically that were being used. However, since Statement 24 addressed this, all states have discontinued the use of paper food stamps. Instead, they're using electronic benefit transfer, eliminating the need for the unique accounting for physical coupons. Now, that has created questions as to what is the appropriate guidance here. And they basically say this is like other non-exchange transactions and that Statement 33 should be applied instead. So again, really looking at changes in behavior and again, more modernization of governments. And then the last one always makes me giggle. There's always terminology changes in these. And it's really just, I think, sometimes missed in an update. So when we're doing an update, we don't catch all of the places where a term is being used. So you'll see here that the term balance sheet, balance sheets, and balance sheet date are going to be replaced by the statement of net position, statement of net position, statements of net position, and statement of net position date, respectively. So again, a little bit of an update there. The term balance sheet date, again, should be replaced by the date of the financial statements. 62 is being updated. The term fund equity should be replaced by assets that are not obtained from borrowing. And the term equity funds should be replaced by other assets used. Statement 62, again, the term fund equity is going to be replaced by equity interest. And then from paragraph 11 of interpretation 1, going way back, the term balance sheet date is again replaced by balance sheet, statement of net position date. So in terms of impact on practice, the terminology changes pretty much don't make a big impact, but they do make them technically correct. And I think that's what they're really going for here. So again, this is out for comments. If you have any thoughts on any of these proposals, I am sure the GASB would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining me today on the Genuine Learning blog, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.